This apparition of Our Lady of Bohan isn't well known, however, it is approved. An unusual story and not well known in the US, this is the story of how Our Lady appeared to 5 children 33 times. Her messages were simple. Sometimes she didn't say anything at all. Sometimes she simply smiled at the children. It happened on November 29, 1932. Fernande Voisin, age 15, and her brother Albert, 11 years old, had been walking to meet their sister Gilberte, age 13, at the nearby Catholic boarding school where she had been a day student. Their 2 friends, Andre and Gilberte Dagembry, 14 years old and 9 years old, joined them along the way. In an interview, one of the visionaries, Gilberte Dagembry, the youngest of the group, gives an account of what happened. On our way there, we played a game of ringing doorbells. I myself never rang. I was too small and couldn't run fast enough. Instead, I liked to hide and watch what happened. On the evening of November 29, 1932, we rang 2 doorbells. We purposely saved a few doors that we hadn't rang for Gilberte so that she could have some fun too. Albert hurried to ring the convent doorbell and then turned to talk to his sister and friends. Upon doing so, he saw a white, glowing figure of a woman floating a little above the train tracks. He suddenly shouted, "Look, the Virgin is walking on the bridge!" Gilberte then says, "We turned our heads and indeed saw a very, very bright figure, not walking on the bridge, but above it, about 20 inches. She was walking in the air. There were clouds hiding her feet, but we could see the movement of her legs under her dress. We were terrified at what we were seeing. I can never describe my fear. We were so terrified. We wanted to go into the convent as quickly as possible." After ringing the doorbell frantically, the sister porter finally opened the door, and without waiting to be invited in, the children pushed through. The sister asked the children what was wrong. "Don't you see anything over the bridge?" they asked her. With it nearly dark out, the sister turned on the outside light and peered out. "I see nothing," she told the children. In the meantime, Gilberte arrived from the study room and immediately saw the bright figure outside. She gasped. The sister portress, who was tired of this, said, "Go home and stop talking nonsense. You probably just saw a branch moving or something." Forced to go back outside, the children ventured toward the apparition. Gilberte says, "I was between my sister Andre and Gilberte Voisin, holding their hands, and was running with my eyes closed so that I wouldn't see anything. I was so afraid. Although I was thinking that the lady was so beautiful, I didn't dare look at her. I suddenly fell. Instinctively, I looked at the bridge. The Virgin was still there. She was no longer walking. She was standing with her hands joined, and she was watching us leave. We were afraid and ran away." At home, they at once told their mother about what they saw. She said, "Enough, I don't want to hear anything more like that." Gilberte and Andre's mother was a good woman, but very strict, especially since their father had died the year before. Gilberte said, "When Mama said something, we had to obey. She was a very severe woman." So the children didn't speak of it, not even to each other, but they thought about the vision all the time. The next evening, when the children arrived at the convent to pick up their sister, they kept looking at the bridge, wondering if they would see the woman again. Albert again rang the doorbell, still looking over his shoulder at the bridge. Suddenly, she was there. Again, she was walking over the bridge with her hands joined together. Again, we were terrified, but less than the evening before, because we were prepared for it. Again, the sister porter didn't see anything. I didn't understand it, but it was so. I had never heard of apparitions. My parents believed in God, and we went to Mass and had evening prayer, but we always prayed to Jesus, not to Our Lady. So this was so new to me, so extraordinary. Again, the children ran home and told their mother they saw the same woman walking over the bridge. Their parents thought that perhaps someone was trying to pull a prank on the children. She said, "I'll come with you, and if anyone is there, I will make sure they don't do it again." So the third night, she went with the children, and was both surprised and dismayed to find that other people were there too. Word had already spread about the children claiming to see the Blessed Virgin. Again, at first they didn't see anything until Albert rang the bell. Once Gilberte came to the door, the lady appeared. Gilberte said, "Our Lady appeared a few meters from us, about a meter from the ground, by the holly bush, which is still there." Her hands were joined. We stood as if nailed to the ground. We looked at her, and that's all. She opened her arms slowly, and looking at all 5 of us, she smiled. Then she disappeared. From that time on, we were no longer afraid. You cannot imagine what we felt when she looked at us and smiled. After the apparition, their mother went into the bushes with a big stick, sweeping the branches around. Not finding anything, she told the children firmly, "If I don't see anything, there is nothing. I don't want you to talk about it any longer. It's enough." The children stopped talking about it, but the people did not. In fact, over the next few days, more and more people came. The children were summoned to talk to the Mother Superior, who said to them, "Do you know what people are saying now? You are telling them that the statue in the grotto is walking." This was true to some extent, as little Gilberte had at first thought that it was the statue she saw in the grotto that was moving. But later she said, "But the apparition that we saw was far more beautiful than the statue in the grotto." But the Mother Superior was irate and told them that she no longer wanted them to come in the evening to pick up Gilberte. She said to them, "You shall never come back into my garden. I will close the gates and let loose the dogs, and if you come into the garden, I will call the police." The children gave their promise and had every intention of following through. But in the evening, they experienced such a supernatural force to go back to the garden that they didn't know what to do, since the Mother Superior had locked the gate and had the dogs out. Standing out in the street across from the convent, they were trying to figure out what to do when suddenly they saw her appear above the hawthorn bush. Gilberte says, "Suddenly we fell to our knees as though a force took us by the shoulders and pushed us down to the ground. We couldn't have stayed standing. She was beautiful, so beautiful. I will never have the words to describe her." The lady spoke to them for the first time and asked them if they would be good. The children cried out, "Yes, we will always be good." Gilberte's mother was not happy to hear of this new information. She said angrily, "You were not content with saying you could see her, now you have to say you can hear her too." The mother's anger made things very difficult for the children. Since she believed they were lying, she wanted nothing to do with them. Before their father's death, things were much easier. Gilberte and her sisters were close to their father, who was a gentle soul. One time, Andre came home with her report card, which had low marks. Unlike her older sister, who was always at the top of the class, Andre was always on the bottom. Her mother said, "We'll see what your father has to say about this." When he got home, he looked at her report card and smiled at her, saying, "You know, it's nothing. I know you'll try to do better next time." And so, without her father, who was so loving towards his daughters, life was very difficult at home with her mother, who loved her children but treated them with severity. More and more crowds were coming, which made their mother even more agitated. She asked the children, "How can you be so calm when you have so many lies on your conscience?" She didn't want to see the children and wouldn't even allow them to eat at the table with her. She said, "Leave the table. I don't want to see you at my table. I don't want liars at my table." In her interview, Gilberte said, "So we would leave, my sister would take her sandwich to the stable with the cows, and I would take my sandwich upstairs to my room to eat. My older sister found my sister Andre hugging the cows, saying, 'My poor cow, you are the only one who doesn't make me cry.'" At one of the apparitions, something extraordinary happened. The Mother Superior's dogs, who were left out in the yard, would jump and snarl at anyone who came near the fence. Nothing could calm them down. However, whenever Our Lady appeared, the dogs would instantly lay down and be quiet. When Our Lady left, they would jump up and start barking as before. In the beginning of the apparitions, one of the children, Fernande, asked, "Why are you coming here?" Our Lady answered him, "So that people will come here on pilgrimage." One of the older children had been instructed by a priest to ask this question. What would you like us to do for you? She answered, a chapel. Gilberte says, she always spoke with few words. She asked us to pray always. Another time she said, I will convert sinners. And another time, I am the Mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, pray always. To Fernande she asked this question, do you love me? Do you love my son? Then sacrifice yourself for me. Gilberte describes what Our Lady looked like. She wore a white dress, straight, which fell in folds, round folds. The dress merged into the cloud, and the cloud covered her feet. We never saw her feet. There was a blue reflection running from her left shoulder to the bottom of her dress. Her hands were joined. She had a rosary hanging from her right elbow, which disappeared entirely into the folds of her dress. Before she would leave, she would open her arms slowly, and the rosary would disappear. Our Lady appeared 33 times, but she didn't appear every day. There are days when they wouldn't see her for many days at a time. For example, she appeared on Christmas Eve, but she didn't appear on Christmas Day. On December 8th, she appeared even brighter and more luminous than ever. The crowd was around them, and when the children fell to their knees, it is said that the impact of their knees could be heard from afar, and that even their stockings would be torn by the force of hitting the ground. Yet, they never had bruises or cuts on their knees. On this particular day, many doctors were there and wanted to do some experiments on the children while they were in ecstasy. Till Gilberte Voisin, they pinched her leg hard. They pinched it so hard that the doctor said, if she didn't feel that, she would be left with a bruise. Yet she wasn't aware of anything. When they took her to the convent the next day for questioning and examination, they told her to take off her stockings so they could look at her leg. There was no bruise or red mark, and she had no knowledge that they had even pinched her. For Andre, they poked her cheek with a knife. She didn't react or feel anything, and for Gilberte, they took a match and held it under her hands. Like StBernadette, Gilberte experienced no pains or burns. In fact, when they asked to see her hands so they could inspect them, she thought it was to check to make sure her hands were clean enough to see Our Lady. Here's a charming story of how the children were mischievous with Our Lady and how she played along. During one of the apparitions, the children figured out how to keep Our Lady to stay a little bit longer. They realized that every time she opened her arms, she would take her leave, but when they prayed a Hail Mary, she would close her hands together and listen to the prayer. So every time she opened her arms, they would quickly start to say Hail Mary, and she would put her hands together, and then they would quickly start another Hail Mary before she could put her arms out again. And so this would make her stay just a little bit longer. Towards the end of the apparitions, Our Lady showed the children her golden heart. Gilberte says, the rays were wider at the base of her heart and ended in points. She wore a veil which covered her shoulders. Around her head were golden rays. They were all the same height. They seemed to be of gold and of light. Through the rays in the front, which were too many to count, we saw the very top of her head very well. Her gaze was very soft and gentle. She was very beautiful and very good. On the last visit, Our Lady told the children that she wouldn't be coming anymore, but little Gilberte didn't want to believe it. Even after Our Lady said farewell and disappeared, Gilberte continued to wait for Our Lady to come back, even years afterwards. At the time, she reasoned that people say goodbye to one another, but they always come back, and so she thought that Our Lady would come back too. After the apparitions, the children led fairly normal lives, but the people still came to Beauraing. They grew up and married. Gilberte says, since the moment she's left us, all 5 of us felt the same thing. We missed her very much. It's an emptiness for us. Our Lady of Beauraing and the Apparition received recognition as authentic in 1949. Every year on November 29th, Mary is celebrated under the title Our Lady of Beauraing, also known as the Virgin with the Golden Heart. Gilberte de Gambry died on February 10, 2015. She was the last living visionary of Beauraing.